Namaskara, good evening, and welcome to this evening's BIC Streams session in collaboration with the Bangalore Literature Festival, Girl Alone, Journeys into the Unknown. We have with us today writers Jahnavi Barua, Madhavi S. Mahadevan, and Rucha Chitrodia talking to Subodh Sankar about the latent feminism and wanderlust of their latest heroines, young women who travel to new terrains and took on hardships and heartbreak. The bios of all the speakers will appear in the chat box, and if you have any questions for them, comments, or observations to share, please do not hesitate to use the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And with that, I hand over.
Thanks, Rekha. Good evening, and my name is Subodh, and it's a pleasure to be in conversation today with Jahnavi, Madhavi, and Rucha about their characters from their latest books. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, unfortunately, Anukrti, who was going to be part of this panel today, was unable to join because of a medical uh, emergency. And our thoughts and prayers with her, and hope that whatever she's dealing with uh, gets better soon. So, let's get started. I mean, the pandemic. It's all around us. And I think what we're trying to do today is also, in some way, if in brief, take a thought slightly away from that. And But, you know, girls traveling alone, women traveling alone, it's always been a difficult task. Now, given what's going on with the pandemic and all of that, what are your thoughts? How does it make it even harder? If we could start with you, Janvi, and then maybe move on to Madhavi and Rucha.
So right, Subodh. I think a woman, a girl traveling alone, it's always been a very difficult journey. Um, all of us women know growing up, the first time you travel alone, whether it's a road trip, on a bus, it's a flight, it's not just the logistics of the journey itself, to be on time to catch the bus or catch the flight. It's also this intense awareness that I have to look after myself. You are aware of the world uh, in a way which is perhaps people of the opposite gender will not be aware. You're aware of what you're wearing, how do you come across to people around you. We teach our girls to be aware of all this, right? So any journey alone, the physical part of it is so stressful in a way. And when you reach your destination, when you are in a new place, you seek to make new connections, new relationship, your guard is always up again in a way in which a man will never have to be aware of. It's a difficult journey in any time frame, in any place. But today, in the pandemic, the added stress of not allowing a very unseen yet very deadly enemy to reach you, to allow him access. It's a very difficult proposition. Having said that, I heard of this wonderful story where this old family friend of mine, a woman of great substance. She was head girl in my school when I was growing up, and she charted her own life. A great mathematician, she very academic girl, very brave person. In the middle of the pandemic, decided with a friend, again a young woman, to drive across central India.
Wow.
And that was something. It was really, it's an amazing story. And when I spoke to her, I had so many questions that at the best of times, two women driving across central India and today. So she had a lot to say about it. But suffice to say, to cut a long story short, was that these are really difficult times for women traveling alone.
True, very, very true. But like you said, there are such positive stories that one can look to. And Madhavi?
I agree that traveling alone for women, for girls, is always, you have to be on your guard. But my experience prior to pandemic and even during the pandemic of travel has been that because you are, it's one time one thing that you realize while traveling is you're very dependent on your traveling companions too. You need to you need to have the ability to make friends and to sort of become part of a group, because you realize how much you rely on other people. I think in this pandemic, as we are sort of, in our own way, we are traveling through this pandemic. And I think that factor, that we all need to hold hands, we all need to sort of cooperate, and is also very relevant. So for me, the journey, this is a journey too. Though I'm sitting at home and I've not really gone, but this is a journey again, and it's very important to that all of us should get through this. Yeah, that's
So true. So true. So true. Rucha, your thoughts?
Yeah, I personally am of the opinion that in the current context of the pandemic among pandemics, I think that patriarchy, or any other archy for that matter, has got one tight thappad. Because while there are cases of people trapped in dysfunctional homes, and the situation does get amplified when the man of the house loses his job or his business phrase, it is but logical that abusive spouses or fathers or brothers would have been weakened by the pandemic. Now, even in peaceful homes, the current situation is very likely to have a major consequence on familial hierarchy. The man of the house is now seen as a mere mortal and as vulnerable and left as bewildered by the happenings as the non-man of the house. So what go do the others in the household have, right? I mean, they have to wear their shoes and get going. In fact, all humans, not just women, have to fend for themselves. When there is no one to bank on and there's no add-on credit card, so to say, left to swipe, they have to step out and travel. And when they do so, of course, they must stumble and they stumble on till they find their footing, so to say. They have to. I think no one has the luxury of using the fashionable previous century lines like, oh, I don't need to work, or oh, I'm a kept woman. No one is keeping anyone here, bro. The default settings of these devastating times is survival. And survival, I believe, is gender agnostic. Yeah.
So brutally true.
Yeah.
So brutally true.
Yeah.
Did my voice just echo, or was that okay?
Yeah, 3 times, I think.
Yeah. I think I
There
agreed
was
with
an
you.
echo.
I agreed with you that much. So, having said that, I think today we have the privilege of talking to 3 authors whose latest works showcase women and their journeys in very, very interesting ways. To start off with, before before we get anything, my first question would be to Rucha.
Yes.
So in Rucha's book is her debut novel. It's also about Maina. It was released earlier this year. And the story is the story of a woman's search for love and belonging, right? And this search for love and belonging takes her through a nice arcing route throughout the book, and it aligns her route with other women.
Aligns
So
her, sorry?
aligns her life with
Okay.
other women's lives. So my question to you is, does this journey of pain and recovery, does this anchor you to a place in any particular manner?
Okay, so in the context of my book, it's also about Maina. This Maina, who's a very is an ultra young protagonist. She moves out of her paranoid and overly protective father's home to a different city altogether to find a job. And in a way, she wants to cut away also from that helicopter parenting which is happening. Now, when people move cities, I'm sorry to say, they leave home with stars for eyes. But reality is always mundane, boring, and it stretches on and on. Now, most people leave a city or a situation in the hope of betterment, unless one is a bit odd, that is. But you have no one to even speak to in a strange city. You know, you go there with your own language that others don't speak or hear, let alone understand. So this is the first heartbreak in a series of heartbreaks that inevitably follow, right? So, like in the book, Mina first finds a weird boyfriend. Then, obviously, a workplace is never an easy sale, even in the best of times. And the downs for an overly protected child like Mina are all the more piercing. Um, so, it is only when we go through these rites of passage, so to say, do we come into our own. And along the way, by and by, we come to belong to the new place. And she, of course, forms a very deep friendship with her landlord, Aruna, who's extremely beautiful and extremely lonely, like so many of us, especially now in the pandemic. And as I was saying, you by and by you come to belong to a new place, and it seeps into you, and a kind of osmosis happens, and the balance, so to say, is achieved. The balance is not restored; it is a new balance which is achieved. Yeah.
Nice. On that note, may I ask you to read a short passage from your book?
Okay. Reality. So, chapter 16, I'll start. Sir, why do you want to name your daughter Maina? You know the superstition around it. Raman, Gopala's wizened farm estate manager, put forth tentatively. What superstition? I love the name. I've loved it since I was a child, though I personally don't like the boring brown and black bird. It is certainly not like the parakeets that are so colorful blue, red, yellow, green, pink. But then Maina does have lovely yellow rimmed black eyes. I and baby have yellow eyes with black eyelashes. That is our one big similarity with the bird and one big difference, said Gopala, chuckling to himself. But sir, seeing a single Maina is supposed to be unlucky, said the old man with genuine concern. Gopala sucked in some air and said, Raman, if you see a black cat when you step outside your home, do you turn back? I wouldn't, because it is just another being, a creature of God like the rest of us. I'm sure there are good black cats and bad black cats, again, like the rest of us. Now, how do you tell apart one cat from the other? Raman, I've already started calling my daughter Maina. My mother has no opinion on the matter, as thankfully she keeps herself aloof from old wives' tales. Don't worry, my child will be lucky for herself and for me. Raman slunk away at that, stricken at what he rightfully assumed was being shown his place.
Nice.
Thank,
Very nice.
thank you.
My next question is going to be directed at Jahnavi. So today we're going to be talking about Jahnavi's latest award-winning book, Undertow. And in Undertow, it's a story where it is the journey of two women. It's the journey of a mother, Rukmini, who travels from where she was born, from her home, for love. And then it is the story of the daughter, Loya, who travels back to her roots for discovery. So, if you really look at it, at least the way I read it, uh, in this, there seems to be some sort of a preordained uh, travel. It's almost like, in a way, how you say, salmon go back to where they were born to sort of spawn, or how an Arctic tern, which was, somewhere in northern Russia, finds its way to India every year in its migratory cycle, generation after generation. So to me, that was a kind of a feeling when I got, that was a kind of a feeling that I got when I read Undertow. So it'd be interesting to, hear your thoughts. How are some of these journeys? Are some of these journeys predestined, preordained, pre-programmed in our own DNA and passed through the generations?
It's interesting you should say that, Subodh, about the birds and that stirring within, because I don't know if you remember, at one point when Loya is contemplating, she realizes she has to now go to Kaziranga. She says exactly this.
Exactly.
She says, I feel a stirring inside me, almost like a migratory bird. It's an instinct which is calling me on to the forest. She'd met the forest. But in a sense, you're right. I think in Loya's case, it definitely was something like this. It was an instinct passed down through the generation from her mother to her. Rukmini, the first protagonist in the book, we have two protagonists, as you know, made the journey from Guwahati to Bangalore 25 years ago in very different times. And that journey meant very different things. Bangalore and the Northeast are anyway very far apart. I mean, I think we're very distance-wise at opposite ends of the country. But today, at least that distance has compressed thanks to many more flights, direct flights, connectivity, FaceTiming, communities coming together. But when Rukmini made that journey, it was a very different journey altogether. If you caught a train, it would be 2 to 3 days, depending on how fast or slow the train was. If you could afford to fly, flights were expensive in those days. There was no direct flight. So connection through Calcutta. If you missed the day connection, then an overnight stay to catch the next flight. And these put up certain barriers among people. I remember early 90s, my grandfather was ill and passed away. My father was based in Bangalore. He heard of his father's being unwell, had a heart attack, and he caught the next flight out, but yet didn't make that connection to Guwahati from Calcutta. Stayed overnight, and early next morning, his father passed away. Had it been today, he would have been there in those last moments. So psychologically, Rukmini's journey was very hard in those days. The distance was vast. Communities did not know each other, so those anxieties threw up walls between communities. She was coming from Northeast to South India, and what did that mean? And of course, more significantly for her, she was defying her parents in doing so. So preordained in the sense that she was following love, and love in a way is preordained, I think. Marriage is made in heaven sort of thing. So she followed Alex to Bangalore, and that was her destiny. Now, this young daughter, just like the salmon going upstream to spawn, always felt something incomplete. Of course, a large part of that was the hostility and the conflict she saw in her parents' marriage and in Rukmini's in-laws, her paternal grandmother's house. She also felt, I think, incomplete because there was one aspect of her life, one part of her family she had never met, the Assamese branch. She'd never met her grandparents, her cousins. She didn't know anything about Assam. So when she turned 25, sort of significant, Rukmini left at 25, now Loya's 25, she takes that plunge and goes upstream back to a land which is now more known thanks to all our connectivity, but in a sense fraught with tension because she is half an insider coming back, and she had to face to all the prejudices that would throw in her life. So yeah, in a way preordained, in a way by choice, partly by choice, but these were journeys meant to happen, and they came full circle.
it's amazing. I mean, I loved your book for many reasons, and to me, this question that kept popping in my head about that whole, whatever you want to call it, circle of life or destiny or whatever, is such a powerful theme that I loved in your book. uh, Madhavi,
Yeah.
The Bride of the Forest, is such a wonderful tale. One of those truly lesser known stories from the Mahabharata that you've taken and written so beautifully about.
Thank you.
Uh, no wonder it's winning all of these awards. Congratulations. This book, to me, is a woman's search for love and belonging. Uh, she's born with a huge weight that was imposed on her. And this book is all about her search for love and belonging that takes her through this long, arcing route that aligns her life with many other women's. Right? Now,
Yes.
she goes through pain, she goes through recovery. You know, does this journey, which has pain and recovery, uh, anchor you to something in a steadfast manner?
Yeah, well, let me try and answer that, because that is
I'm
a
trying to
question
summarize the
which,
entire book into a single question. Sorry.
no, but you've done you put it very well, Subodh. So let me try and answer it. Does it anchor her to something? I, her journey eventually starts with the question, uh, what does a woman want? That's the point. There is that chapter in the novel where she discusses with another woman, her foster mother, what is it that a woman wants. That's a question that nobody asks, because it's assumed that a woman wants what her men folk want, what her family wants. This is how it is in patriarchy. So this question itself becomes irrelevant, because she wants, we know what she wants. She wants a husband, she wants sons, she wants the well-being of her family, and so on. But uh, the character in the novel, the protagonist, Drishadwati, she is not satisfied by this answer. The question keeps popping up again and again, and the different women she meets as she makes her journey through four kingdoms is all try to answer this question in different ways. And finally she realizes that she that all these answers don't work for her. So there is this question, I think, that all of us perhaps ask at some point: what do we want? And we say, well, we want what others around us have, the same things, more or less. We want the happiness which other people have. So she comes to an understanding of herself, and it is a journey which has to be through pain, through intense pain, through separation, through all those things. She comes to an understanding of herself and realizes that what she wants is not the security. I mean, she's ready to trade all that which comes, with um, marriage and family and so on. She doesn't want all that. She wants complete and absolute freedom. Freedom today for a woman is, it's not something which unusual. Women, but in the time in which the story is set, freedom for a woman was almost an impossibility. How it was, a woman was always anchored to a man. It was her father, her husband, or her son. There was always a male in her life who would So at that time, freedom was completely rare, unusual, and this is what she wants for herself. So just one second. Yeah. So yeah. So this is how it is to her selfhood. Her journey is to her selfhood, and that actually is the anchor, which she, it is her true self, the inner self which exists inside her, which then leads her to what she wants. Have I answered the question?
Yes, you have. And for the benefit of those that have not read the book, uh, Bride of the Forest is the story of Drishadvati, who's also referred to as Madhavi from the Mahabharata. She is the daughter of King Yayati, who's been given a boon, which could also possibly perceive it as a curse. She's blessed that she will only give birth to sons, and 4 sons. So it's a very, very interesting tale, and to set the context, Madhavi. So before we sort of move on and start exploring a couple of the different aspects of your heroines and their journeys, Jahnavi, would it be possible for you to read a passage from your book, just
Sure.
to get a flavor?
So since this was about journeys, I thought I would actually read out the bit where Loya travels to Guwahati from Bangalore.
Brilliant.
And for a very brave girl, she's an elephant biologist. She's lived in forest. She's looked an elephant in the eye, wild elephant. She's terrified of flying. So this is a very short bit, sort of really taking the word journey literally and talking about her journey. Here we go. She was claiming what she wanted. She was doing the right thing, she reassured herself on the flight. But that did not stop her from becoming increasingly overwrought as the minutes ticked by. It did not help that Loya was afraid of flying. For a girl otherwise so brave, she had stared wild elephants in the eye. Loya was unusually nervous of flying. She had not traveled much by air, but every time she did, all her powers of reasoning deserted her, and she was overwhelmed by the thought that it was unnatural to be so high up in the sky, challenging gravity. She would have traveled to Assam by train, but that would take 2.5 days, not counting the delays. Assam was on the edge of the journey, on the opposite corner from Bangalore, and a flight, it had to be. As the plane accelerated down the runway and with a determined thrust lifted into the blue sky, Loya panicked. Had it not been for the seat belt, she would have stood up and rushed out into the aisle, demanding to be let out. When she was a little girl on a trip to Delhi, Loya had held on to Rukmini's hands with such force that at the end of the journey, there were crescent-shaped cuts of her nails on Rukmini's pale hands. This time, she dug her nails into her thigh. After the takeoff in Calcutta, Loya felt herself unraveling rapidly. When 40 minutes later, the captain announced landing in Guwahati, she was overcome by nausea and spent the better part of the descent retching into the air sickness bag in front of her. She missed the one sight she had been looking forward to, the Brahmaputra River as it looped through Guwahati. So this is a description of her actual physical journey in which anybody who's terrified of flying, I'm sure, can identify. But in a way, it's a manifestation of the uneasiness she feels about taking this very risky step into a world she had never been into, she didn't know, and she knew could possibly be hostile and dangerous to her.
Absolutely. Beautiful passage. Really well read, Jahnavi. Thank you so much for that. So, so the 3 books are all set in very, very, very different places. Maina is set in the mill districts of Mumbai. Undertow is set in the Northeast and a little bit in Bangalore. And of course, The Bride of the Forest is set in medieval times in Bharat. Now, the question that I have, and this is a question that I want to pose to each of you, is, you know, the challenges that your heroines face are in a lot of ways sort of linked to the places that they're in. Mina's challenges are very centric to Mumbai. Rukmini's challenges and Loya's are, of course, set in the turmoil and the reality of the Northeast. And of course, Rishadbati's is set in the times that she lived in and the place. The question that I have for all of you, and I'd set it as a common question, is what is the impact of this setting, the place, on your heroines, right? They're all traveling constantly, right? Either by choice or by compulsion, they're all traveling constantly. And this place becomes like this co-traveler with them, right? Now, I want you to just talk about that part of how the place becomes a part of that journey with each of your characters. And maybe we can start with you, Jahnavi.
Sure, Subodh. So Undertow is very much about place. I think place is a character in the book, and definitely a character in the lives of these two women. For Rukmini, she when she falls in love, decides to marry Alex. This is the early 80s in Assam.
Mm.
And Assam in those days, it has been turbulent for the last 3 decades almost, but in those days, I think was at the peak of its what we call the agitation. Very well named because everyone was agitated. You know, it was about the ASU discovering this huge rise in numbers from illegal outsiders and the movement, the resistance to that forthwith after that. So she was growing up. She was in college, and she was a young woman, a young adult, and she was growing up in this environment that was charged with feeling against the outsider. There was a huge feeling about a very nationalistic feeling going around, and she's willy-nilly got caught in the middle of it. She fell in love with a man from Bangalore, what is seen as a non-local in those parts, and her decisions that she took then to marry him, to defy her family, to defy her community, and leave her state, sort of impacted her life, every day of her life ever going forward. So the place, the political situation of the place definitely impacted her personal life in a way she could never sort of redeem. She couldn't come out of that chakra, you know, how she was caught in it. Similarly for Loya, she grew up in Bangalore, a city she loved. She had no issue with Bangalore, but she had a lot of difficulty in the house she was growing up with, in her paternal grandparents' house, wherein even as a child, she could feel that she wasn't welcome. She could feel the subtle hostility towards her mother and herself. So that wasn't really a welcoming place, and that impacted her. She became guarded. She perhaps grew up, she matured faster than her years. She grew up too quickly, in a sense, and had to become her own person. And then she moves to Assam, to this yellow house. So for me, the place is the house this time around. And despite all her apprehensions and despite her thinking that she would not be welcome and she would be perhaps chucked out of there and it would there'd be a lot of hostility towards her, she in fact was met with welcome. And that unwomaned her and all her aggression actually. And she became softer, more flexible, in the end allowed a window of acceptance to the old man who came into her life, her grandfather. So I think your immediate surroundings, be it the city, when we say place, or the house that you are in, again a place, impacts you so intensely. And it definitely did in both these women's lives.
Brilliant. And your novel, in that sense, to me also, uh, evokes the politics, the reality of what was going on, and that's such a strong theme that comes through in your novel. So, uh, Rucha, your thoughts on how, you know, Maina and Mumbai were
Yeah.
co-travelers.
Yeah. So this book is set in the now defunct textile mill district of Bombay that had once done a lot for its financial heft, actually in the previous century, most of the previous century, till the 1980s. So the mill areas and their unique dynamics also played a huge role in molding the cultural and social ethos of the city and, of course, its politics. They made up a colorful, living, thriving microcosm till an unending strike broke the industry's backbone for good. Now, Maina, by and by, gets acquainted with a new home. And okay, today the mill lands are prime real estate and they have been repurposed, so to say, and have made way for plush housing societies and, of course, a thriving mill district. And Maina lives in one of those societies and works in one of those offices. And I wanted to map this transition of the mill lands juxtaposed against Maina's own journey from a baby to her own person.
Absolutely.
You know, so in a way, the mill lands of Mumbai are the other hero of the book. Now, which is why the title of the book, it's also about Maina. It's not just about Maina. I'm sorry, it's got a dozen characters and it is a very consciously crowded book. It is, after all, set in Mumbai, which is a very crowded city in itself. So the story sort of mirrors its packed matrix. You know, now the story is set in the present, and I believe when one heroes a character, a look into their past is, of course, as critical as the present, right? Now, because the present, the here and now, is only a moment long, it gets replaced by another here and now by the time you even mouth those words. So it's like a full stop before a comma. And I'm not trying to be esoteric here. I mean, it is a fact. The present is a continuum, and a continuum can only be mapped. So in a story, we choose or pinpoint what we consider critical junctures in a continuum, a progression, and write about those. The present then in the current context, and the current context can even be decades long, is the mill district, and which is why we call a specific time in history an era. So I have therefore gone into the history of the mills, the number of mills that were set up, when they were set up, how many workers they employed, or their home lives, their work lives, social lives, struggles, joys, sorrows, etc., through the long and short, one second, years, till they were left shell shocked by the most unexpected end to their livelihood. And it was a major disruption, so to say. Now, disruption is the word du jour because of the impact of internet on life, on actually everything as we know it. But disruption has been a reality of every epoch. So what follows disruption in the little life of Maina on one hand, and the legendary mill district of Mumbai on the other, is what this book postulates. And of course, they come together. The city does seep into her. Yeah.
And that's one of the beautiful things about the book. It is truly also about Maina.
Yeah.
There, there are so many characters, including Bombay, which plays such a big part. It's like you've written this big overarching umbrella of a story, and takes so many characters under its shade and gives us a beautiful picture of their lives. I really enjoyed that part about
Thank you.
the book. Madhavi,
Yeah.
your chance to answer the question.
Yeah, so let me try and understand your question. I think what you are asking me is how is place a co-traveler in her journey, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So actually, if you look at the story, it starts from the forest, and then it, she comes out of the forest, and in the end she returns to the forest. So in a way, it's exactly like you said, it is the salmon coming back, and so that cycle is repeated. Here you have two settings. You have the forest, and you have the civilized world,
Mm.
or whatever was the opposite of the forest, the fields, the cities, the economy, these growing rich, everything that was different from the forest. For Drishadvati, as she journeys from the forest, she's also very eager to leave the forest because she's a young girl then, and there's this big world outside she wants to explore. So, but as her journey continues through this world, what she realizes is that this world is all about captivity for her. For women, this is not the free world. The free world for her is the forest again. So the two settings mirror this and strengthen this perception of hers, that she was freer in the forest than she will ever be in this world of where men and women live, but not equally. There was more egalitarianism in the forest than there is in this world, though the forest is a harsher place and this world is supposed to be a more protective one. It really, what she realizes is that it doesn't protect her. And that is, as you explained earlier, the context of the story, that she was given a boon that she would be the mother of sons, which makes her a prized commodity. She stops being a human being. And to recover that self, the human, herself as a human being, she has to head back into the forest. So setting all along is what is determining her journey.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the other commonality that I kind of drew between these three books, is that this journey truly is character building, and the journey that these women go through. Uh, in the end, all your books, all three books, in a sense, describes the patriarchy and the conditions under which they were forced to, begin their journeys, begin their stories in the book. But the journey, the spaces that they go through, the people that they meet, uh, essentially is a character building journey as well for them. And in the end, it helps them in their own way, sort of smash that patriarchy. So, to go back and, maybe direct the question to you, Madhavi, towards the end, by choosing to walk away from everything that she's been taught throughout her life, everything she's been taught that she ought to aspire for, and by choosing to sort of walk away from that, Drishadvati essentially sort of reclaims her agency, and more importantly, she, in her own way, forgives everybody that's wronged her, and uh, and in doing so, smashes that patriarchy that sort of governed her life up until that point. If you can read a passage from that book, from that part, and talk about, how that patriarchy essentially gets smashed in Drishadvati's life.
Actually, Subodh smash is a very dramatic word for what she does,
It's
really,
it's
which is
it's done in such a subtle manner, but she smashes it. She, in her own mind, just forgives everybody. And that, I think, is the greatest way in which you can smash things.
Yes, you're absolutely right. If you really want to walk away from something, if you really want to leave something behind you in the past, and the thing is not to just forget, but to forgive. And this is actually the lesson that she learns at at the very end of her life. Because the thing is that though terrible things happen to her, she sort of the pain makes her understand why these things are happening. She doesn't support it, but she knows she can do very little to change it. All she can do is make her own choice and walk away. So the smashing of the patriarchy is just a simple decision, that when she is finally asked, in the gathering of kings, to choose her husband, she says, I choose the forest for my husband. And that is the completion of her, that is her decision. So yes, moving away from this, like I said, it's freedom, captivity, and freedom again. This is her notion of freedom. So moving away, and freedom can only come when we learn to forgive.
Absolutely.
This was, it's probably tougher. It's easier to forget, but it's very, very difficult to forgive those who have hurt us in any way. And this is what she does in the end. And it is the reason why finally, in the epilogue of the book, those sons that she's had, whom she's never seen all her life, come to her. They come to her for something. And since you wanted me to read out something from the book, would you like me to do it now or later?
If you can read a piece now, I think that would be very nice.
Yeah. So this, in like I've just explained what redemption means to her and why it is necessary. Now this is at the fag end of the story, when her sons, and the kingdoms and everything that she has left behind. It's been almost 15-16 years since that happened, and she's living alone in the forest. And the she her sons start showing up. First the eldest comes, then his brother, then his brothers start coming, and they are all kings. They are kings of 4 different kingdoms. And not just that, they are very big kings. They are Chakravarti Rajas, samrats of that time, and known, illustrious men and everything. So why do they come to this woman who lives so simply in the forest? She lives like an ascetic. And um, this is a passage where she mulls over why they come to her. She says, though I was protective about my solitude, I couldn't help but look forward to their visits. However, I refused to accept the lavish gifts of grain, ghee, spices, and fine cloth. While you're here, live the way I live, I said. They agreed without a murmur. Why did they come? Was it because within my story were nested the stories of their births? I had carried each one for 9 months. In those times, the most difficult period of my life, had I seeded my pain and bitterness in the unborn life inside me? This thought disturbed me. Creatures of the forest have ways to heal themselves. While their scars are testimony to their truth, an eye torn out in a fight, a limb maimed, wild animals do not keep past wounds alive. Life does not stop for them. They do not sorrow for what has gone, but simply get on with the task of living a day at a time. By making the journey back to the forest, I too have tried to get on. The simpler daily rhythms of my life here have dulled the intense pain I once felt, even returned to me a sense of harmony. But have I really erased the feeling of abandonment that has hollowed me from within for years? Have I passed on the shadows of scars to my sons? The unseen wounds are the most painful of all.
Beautiful.
That's it.
And like I was telling you, the end part of this book, and this is for those that are reading who haven't read the book, my view is this is a beautiful book because I think it's a story that is not very popular. It's not heard. This is not one of those stories from the Mahabharata that your grandmother probably told you. But it's such a powerful story, and the end part of the book is to me really the best part of the Bride of the Forest. Thank you for reading from that.
Thank you. Thank you, Subodh.
Uh, Jahnavi, the patriarchy in your book plays out, I think, much like many of us are familiar with. It's politics in your family. It's politics in the living room. It's politics around the dining table, right? And I'm not talking about politics from a political sense, but it's the familial how politics of relationships between people. And the patriarchy comes through that. And Rukmini chooses to walk away from that in a particular way, but then she's subject to something else in the family of the man that she married. And then with Loya, it is again going back from that into breaking that and discovering that there is acceptance and that patriarchy really is dissolved. Can you talk about how in your with your heroines, you're talking about their way of breaking through this and coming out as the people that they ought to be.
As you said, for Rukmini, unfortunately for her, her personal drama took place on the stage of a huge outside political drama. So the politically charged inside-outsider feeling in Assam in those days certainly fed into her family's very rigid stand against a man from the outside. And she had to deal with that. And in the beginning, I thought she showed a lot of strength of character and strength of decision making and confidence in choosing this man and choosing to walk away from her family, her town, into a city, a family she did not know at all. And you would think, right, so both that any adverse experience would help in building character and would help us to delve into ourselves and find those hidden strengths we were not aware of. So she started off with showing a lot of strength of character. Unfortunately, it stopped there. When she moved to Bangalore and she walked into this family, which showed her resistance, she found her man drifting away from her. She never really bonded with the city, never made any outreach to it. And somehow she just seemed to recede. She seemed to withdraw into herself and recede into a place far away from everything around her. So disappointing, but in a way, she really just withdrew. She did not really take her challenges head on in this case. Loya, on the other hand, very young, very early on, as I mentioned earlier, even as young as 12, 13 years of age, learned to know her own mind and learned the wisdom of not displaying that knowledge. While she knew what her mother was up to, while she knew the fractures in the family, the fault lines, she decided she would not confront, she would appease, she would acquiesce to whatever was happening around her. Not because she was afraid, because she thought it was wise to do so. So this little girl shows strength of character from the early adolescent years. That strength of character and strength of knowing herself, the insight into herself, is what eventually helps her, stands in very good stead when she decides to take that plunge into traveling to Assam to meet a place and people she did not know at all. And I was so reminded, I'm so reminded of what you said, in that she dissolves patriarchy, she resolves her conflict, the situation around her, by simply forgiving. So she went on with this, she went in very aggressive, very sort of all adrenaline charged, to stand up to this grandfather who she thought would be this sort of monster-like figure, and to stand up to whoever was in her way and to smash walls and to break things. And, she was always on edge. She was always willing to take on a fight. And yet she was disarmed by the welcome she received from Torun, the grandfather, from the old domestic staff who lived in that old house, by the very landscape. And I mean, when we talked about place before, I forgot to mention that the place disarmed her. The river welcomed her. The sky was welcoming. She felt something inside her in sync with what was happening around her. And she decided to forgive. So this young woman who'd held on to a grudge very quietly, very sort of in the depth of her being, nevertheless a grudge and an anger towards her mother's place, decides to open all windows and to forgive. And the minute there was a scene, I don't remember, where Torun plays an old Beatles record which belonged to her mother. And I think that's when her anger, her animosity, all her everything dissolves into just affection, love, and forgiveness. And I think that is how they resolve their conflict. So she developed that strength of character through her adverse experience growing up. Yet at the end of it, she had the wisdom to know how to choose her battles, which to choose, and how to fight them. To me, that's saying a lot. Forgiving someone, being able to apologize, say sorry, in sincerity, mind you, not just because you feel that's a tactical thing to do. For me, it takes a great strength of character. And I remember once in a personal experience, I felt I had done something wrong and said sorry to this person opposite. And I was met with a response that, how weak are you? How seasonal can you get? Yesterday you said this and today you're saying sorry. And I stepped back and I thought, Subodh, that really, is it weak of someone to change one's mind? Because Roya changed her mind. And the changing of mind was what allowed the story to carry on. And actually, in the end, mended that bridge between Doron and Rukmini also. So there's no weakness, there's no shame in changing your mind for the right reasons, in forgiving for the right reasons. And very often, you can disarm and dismantle the opposition by just doing that.
Absolutely. I mean, the great personal strength it takes to do that is not spoken about enough. Rucha, your book is, the story of someone shrugging off the pain of heartbreaks and personal pain, and then the recovery of going through that, and in this, the sort of pressures are not just internal, also the external pressures of living, quote unquote, almost alone in a new city and having to deal with that. It'd be nice if we can hear from you how you deal with the breaking of those chains.
In Maina's case, she's helped greatly by her father, who's the opposite of a patriarch, and her landlord, the woman who's
Aruna.
very lonely, Aruna, yes. And she's been on her own, and she herself comes out of a very bad kind of a personal phase where she's been abandoned by her husband. And abandoned is the right word because she had no career left or nothing to speak of. She was just left completely rudderless. So it's her coming of age story also among the many characters. But so Maina doesn't have to really, her struggle, I mean, compared to the other, in a normal coming of age story, is bolstered by two very strong characters in her life, her father and the landlord, who are like with her 24/7, who are a bit too 24/7 with her. And of course, heartbreak and everything, she and the disappointments in her job. And she, somewhere along the way, she realizes that she's ambitious and she's her own person. And I guess coming of age is also a function of age. It's also a function of time. So she's older, maybe by just 2, 3 years, and she's wiser, and she realizes that everything has a shelf life, you know, that pain as much as happiness. And as I said, a new balance is achieved. Yeah.
Nice. Let me just ask you, what was your favorite part? If you had to pick a favorite part from this book, what would that part be? I think I've talked about parts that I liked. Rucha, if you had to pick a favorite part of this book, which one would you pick?
For me, the Millans are my favorite hero. And everything from the time and everything about it, the entire, because I personally, for me, in the entire city of Bombay, that is my favorite area. And everything about it, the journey from the time, now they've just become real estate. But there was a time when they were very thriving, and somehow that a bit of that flavor still exists today, So which is what Maina, during her evening walks and evening strolls, she gets by and by introduced to those. So that's my favorite bit, yeah.
Nice. Madhavi, for you?
Yeah, well, I would like to, I mean, the book on the whole, since it's a story of exploitation, which is how it has always been told in the past. I've while writing, I felt that unrelenting, sorrow, grief, pain, and everything had to, there had to be some relief from it. So my favorite parts are actually the funny bits of the story. For instance, when there is a bit where there's a flood in the plains and all the souls go up to Vishnu Lok, to Vaikuntha, and then the confusion that is created in that place because all these souls come in and then they are not used to the idea of not having their bodies with them, and what is Vaikuntha, and are we going to see the Lord finally, and these kind of questions. And then they are told, look, you are still, you still think in terms of the human body. So that was one bit which I really enjoyed. Likewise, the foundational myth of Banaras, how Banaras came to be, Shiva's city, and then Shiva was told to leave it, and because Devodas, the new king, wants that it should be freed and he should be allowed to run it without any interference from the gods. So these little sort of interludes, in the story, were actually the ones that I enjoyed writing. So perhaps they are, I could call them some of the nice parts of the story.
Jahnavi?
I think, like Madhavi, I liked the two bits wherein the tension was released. I think when you're writing so much conflict, so you're on edge too. As a writer, you build up your levels of tension and aggression in your writing, taut, charged prose, and the emotions are so charged, and you're always part of that. So I enjoyed very much the scene where, you play the record. Laura discovers that Torun kept her mother's records, and she goes to the whole lot. She makes piles of them on the floor, and she picks up a Beatles double album, one of my personal favorites, the Beatles love songs, and she plays it. She doesn't know how to use a turntable, and Torun teaches her. She's of this age and he's of that, and she does it beautifully. And then Because the World is Round, the song comes on, and they share that moment. For me, that was lovely. Similarly, towards the end, where Torun asks her for a drink, something not normally done in middle class Assamese households. The grandfather asks his young girl, "Are you old enough, right? You're 25. Have a drink with me." So he has whiskey, and she has a glass of rum. And as he's drinking, he, perhaps because of the drink or because he allows himself that charade of having a drink, my guard is down, finally tells her that I miss Rukmini, I love her, I was wrong, I love you, I am lonely, so that the release in those two scenes, for me, more emotional and my favorite bits, really.
Nice. So we've got a question from Sharmila Ganeshan. She asks, what is the most transformative journey that the authors have personally undertaken? So if each of you can answer that question.
Most transformative journey, who has taken?
That you yourself have taken.
Oh, I.
Yes.
Writing this book.
I'll go next. I think for me, I think motherhood, Subodh. The sense it involved not just motherhood, this new huge change in my life. It also involved me leaving behind a world where I was a doctor, a world of medicine, into one of being a mother, being in the house, and subsequently becoming a writer. So in a sense, writing dovetailed into my bringing up my child. So that were two journeys braided into one, and definitely very, very impactful.
Madhavi?
I'm trying to answer that, and it's a bit difficult because the journey isn't over yet, and the transformation. I mean, the point is we write books which thankfully they end and they get, but I think all Rucha and Janvi will agree. I hope that all of us regard ourselves as work in progress. So we are changing and thinking about things and writing them and writing these stories or whatever. So the journey is transforming. It's hard to say which is the most transformative. For me, nothing is over yet, so I can't say where the transformation has stopped. It is ongoing, and I have to just leave it at that.
Nice. So we're waiting for any other questions to come in. In the meanwhile, it'd be nice to know, what are you working on now? And we'll start with you, Madhavi.
I'll tell you very honestly, it's keeping sane. How does one keep sane at a time like this? So yes, there's I mean, there is always the next book which is waiting for you, and which you sort of you're thinking around all the time. But at the moment, it is just praying that we come out through this, and I think I'm working on that alone, that we somehow get through from one day to the next, and everybody stays safe, and we get over this entire thing.
So true.
I think I completely agree, Madhavi. I'm jumping in. I was telling you, Subodh, right? It's so hard to focus on. I've not been able to read, forget write. I've not been able to read for a year. Big slump, And of course, writing is. I'm anyway a very slow writer, as you know. And right now, I can't even get your thoughts organized to sort of begin to think of writing. It's just, I think, taking each day as it comes and making sure everyone is safe and well.
Yeah, we're just focusing on staying alive.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we have no more questions. So on that note, should we wrap up that session with, thank you so much for having this conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed reading all three of your books. I've had the fortune of reading Undertow and Bride of the Forest multiple times. Rucha, Maina was a wonderful book, and thank you for writing the book. And
Thank you.
once again, to echo your thoughts, I hope that everyone we know and everyone they know and everyone they know can hopefully remain safe. And we hopefully get from this place of sheer madness to a place where the madness is much lesser very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Subodh.
Thanks a lot, Subodh.
Thank you. And
thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Lekha. Thank you, BIC.
Thank you, BIC, BLF.
Yeah.
Thank you, BIC.
Good evening.
Good evening.